16th of July today. Only a few nights since I trapped at Missing Carl, and a decent night too. Not many moths, but a decent range of species. And I'm hoping for a good range of species in at least a couple of hours that I'm aiming to be here in Sherwood Forest. It has got a little bit breezy. The temperature is forecasted to go down to about 10 degrees centigrade by the end of the night, and the sky is also forecasted to clear, and that clearance I could see on my way here. So hopefully the temperature will stay up and the moth activity will be good, tucked away here in the heart of Sherwood Forest. There's nothing quite like that first cup of tea when you've just fired up the trap and you're waiting for things to drop in. But do have two moths already, middle-barred miner and small fan-footed wave, both fairly typical early species in. And now what looks like a Macwing Swift has just arrived. In terms of the swift moths, of which we have several here in the UK, Macwing Swift are larger than most. There's only Ghost Moth which is larger still. So that's a nice moth for Sherwood. Common enough, but still a nice species to get on tonight's trap list. So 3 species in already, and we've only just fired up. Hopefully we'll have a good couple of hours here. Well, I thought I'd show you one of the Macwing Swifts. There's now 2 in actually, and both are this rather plain form. If one of the better marked forms comes in, then I will show you that, because to be honest, you get no idea of how this moth got its name looking at this form. But I'll put a photo in anyway of the more typical form of Macwing Swift, which is a very intricate and beautifully marked species. As with all swifts, they tend to fly like mad when they first come into the light, almost flying upside down at times, but eventually they settle down and will remain in situ for several hours at least. But a nice species to get this, and a nice one to start off the night. That breeze is getting quite strong, especially at the tops of the trees. I particularly chose this location here because it's low down as the topography of Sherwood Forest goes. So I thought it would be nice and sheltered, and indeed here it actually is at ground level. And it's certainly mild enough. We've currently got a temperature of 17, but the thermometer is still slowly starting to sort itself out, so it'll drop down another couple of degrees. The car said 15 degrees on the way here, and that looks suspiciously like another small fan-footed wave. Wondering how on earth I can tell, aren't you? But all moth trappers will tell you that you get to realise a certain species as it flies into the light, and it's something that I've mentioned many times before. It's surprising what you pick up after a few years. I do love me a crambid. I tell you why, because it's the eyes on crambids. They always look like they've got a pupil and they're really staring you out and wondering what the hell is going on. And there are a great range of micro moths to get to learn the crambidae. They may look very similar to most people, but if you work with them, and you'll soon get used to them, because you're going to catch a lot of them. No matter where you trap, if you're trapping in an urban garden or a suburban garden or out in more rural areas or woodlands, you will invariably catch numbers and a range of crambid moths, the so-called grass veneers. This one is Chrysitutia cormella, and it's one of the commonest that you will get. It will make up the majority of many catches. The Griffula straminella is another one, smaller than this and often a bit plainer and almost appearing white sometimes when faded. But what these are a good example of, the crambids, are, because everybody's talking about the lack of moths and the lack of insects, these clearly illustrate it. Normally you would put these up in grassy areas by the dozen, and certainly in parts of Sherwood Forest and the more heathland areas of Sherwood Forest, that's what we used to do. They used to be everywhere. Not so today, and this year especially, these are in short supply, at least at the moment, and I can't see it changing for the rest of this year. I trapped recently a missing car, and in a number of hours I trapped only 5 Chrysitutia cormella. Normally I would have expected that to have been a couple of hundred Chrysitutia cormella, and I trapped no Griffula straminella. So these are really struggling. I know most things are struggling in 2024, but the crambids are a perfect example of how our moths are currently in short supply. But they're a great family, a great range of moths. They're not too difficult to learn and to differentiate, and you'll soon be able to pick them up and learn them by sight when they come into your light. You might as well learn them, because quite often crambids might even make up as much as 40 or 50% of the moths attracted to your light. Now, you'll know of my fetish for green moths, and here's a fine example, one of the best examples of a green moth that we have, and this is a green silver lines. Quite beautiful moth, obviously very appropriately named, basic green colour, very beautiful bright green, and those 2 silver lines going across each of the forewings. And what's nice about this moth is that the antenna and best part of the front legs are tinged with pink. It's a little beauty, this is. Very nice moth, and I haven't seen one of these for a couple of years that I can remember. So nice to reacquaint myself with one of our more attractive moths. Green silver lines, and you will get this in your garden. I've never had it more than a couple of times, I don't think, but it's one that you can expect. Oh, just coming up to an hour gone. Pine hawk moth is in, first one seen this year. Quite an aged and battered individual, looking by the state of it, and it's not settled down yet, otherwise I'd still show it you. Everybody likes a big one. And of the other species that have come in, there's a couple of common lutestring. I will try and show you one of those, but you'll be considerably underwhelmed. They're not the most sparkling of moths, I'm afraid. But apart from that, one of the nicest moths is a micro, and I'll put a photo in, and it's Aethes rubigana. That's a nice species, one that Dillis and I used to catch a number of times at Clipston Old Quarter. And looking through the other species that we've had, I've mentioned iron prominent, we've had buff archers, first dingy footman of the year, good numbers of small fan-footed wave, that's the commonest moth by far at the moment, and a number of drinker moths too, which are forever bounding around and never sit still. So doing very well, over 20 species, and that's not bad at all. And it's very pleasant conditions too. That breeze seems to have dropped thankfully. Just hope the temperature doesn't. It's currently at 15, so that's fine by me. Well, it's getting very nicely busy. 3 of the big lads in now. We have a very large poplar hawk, which may appear at the bottom of the screen there. It is just flying up and hitting the light, in addition to the pine hawk that is still in somewhere, and we also have first elephant hawk moth in too. But there's some nice moths appearing, and I've got one which I know is new for the Sherwood Forest NNR, and it's a pyrrhid, and it's Anarnia lancialis, not a species that I thought would ever get here. And as far as I'm aware, it's only been recorded in Nottinghamshire, right in the very north of the county, at Missincar and at Misterton too. But I need to check up on that, but I'll drop a photo in, because it is a moth that I've caught up at Missincar myself, but I didn't expect to see that turn up at the light here. Not big numbers of moths, but now on 33 species, and I'm sure that when I next walk around the light, which will be shortly, I will be able to add another couple of species onto it. So it's very, very promising indeed. Have to include this beauty. I know everybody's seen them, but you can't get fed up of seeing such a beautiful moth. Obviously this is a elephant hawk moth, settled down very nicely too, but it's not the largest of the hawk moths that's in, because that accolade goes to this chap, this fabulous and very large poplar hawk moth. Again, another common moth, but everybody likes a large moth, and in the UK they don't come much larger than most poplar hawks. A fabulous moth, very distinctive outline and shape, looks like dead leaves when these are perched in a willow tree or on a poplar tree. Quite well camouflaged, and second brood of these is now on the wing. Did catch a couple that came in late on at Missincar the other night. This one's a bit earlier, and funny enough had settled on the bumper of the car. The beautiful moth, and one that if you're running a public moth trapping event, this is one of those moths that's a must see for most of the children there. A fabulous thing, beautiful. Now here's a definite success story of recent years, and this is a black arches, and many of you watching this will have probably taken this for the first time in the last 10-15 years or so. But it was back in 2007 when Dillis and I trapped one of these at Lownwood at Eakring, and we were especially excited because we knew that there were no Nottinghamshire records for many years prior to us catching that one. But since then it's done remarkably well, and will now be found in many woodlands, certainly throughout the Nottinghamshire area, and presumably throughout much of the Midlands. And what a fabulous moth to have come to your trap. Always makes me think of it that a child has been let loose with a crayon on a white background, but superbly scrawled. Whichever child has decorated this moth, it's an absolute beauty. And if you want to see a fabulous antenna on a moth, catch one of these. Just look at those antennae, absolutely stunning things. So that's black arches, and it's highly likely to turn up in a suburban garden. I think that I've had this at home offhand, but I would have to check. But what a stunner. Now, if I've perhaps not tempted you enough by showing you the Cranbid Chrysatutia cormella, one of the grass veneers, earlier on in this video, maybe I can change your mind and encourage you. And what a species to encourage anybody. This is Catoptria pinella, a quite stunning species. Obviously it's a micro moth, but what an absolute beauty, and an easy one to identify too. I remember seeing the first one of these in Seymour Grove, at the edge of Sherwood Forest Country Park, and I let it go by accident trying to film it. I won't tell you or indulge the names that Dillis called me, but you wouldn't have thought such language had come from the mouth of a woman. But it did, and I heard it. However, it wasn't long before we started to catch this moth regular in Sherwood Forest, and we've had this at home. I've had this on a number of occasions. What a moth to get. It's an absolute cracker. So this is Catoptria pinella, a moth that should encourage everybody to delve into pyralids and crambids, at least if they don't bother with the other micro moths. It's a fascinating world out there. Well, it's nice to see a bit of moth activity coming in around the light, and a decent number of moths on the sheet. Say not big numbers, but a nice range of species so far. We're just, I'll have a look, we're at 11:20 now, so we're just over an hour and a half into this trapping session. See what else comes in. Now, it's a nice moth, and to be honest, I don't know whether I've ever showed you one of these before, but this is a September thorn. Now, you may be thinking, oh, what's a moth named after September doing flying in the middle of July? And that's a very good question, to be honest, and it's probably to do with 150 odd years ago when this moth was first given its common name, that September was its main flight period. However, times and climate have both changed, and this moth can now be recorded any time from mid-July onwards. There's a very similar species called an August thorn, and that typically flies later than September thorn. It all gets increasingly confusing again, but the two moths are very similar, and I've tried to turn many a September thorn into an August thorn and had to admit defeat. August thorn is a moth that still eludes me, but we'll have to make do with September thorn. A very nice moth, fairly common, certainly a woodland species. I've not had this at home yet. I thought that maybe I would have done by now, but one of these has yet to grace the garden trap. So that's September thorn. Really good range of moths this evening. The only species we're into double figures for is Scoparia ambigualis, which in a site like Sherwood Forest I would expect, but again, usual story this year, numbers well down. It's one of those moths that will always occur in good numbers here in Sherwood, but we've done well. We're on to 63 and certainly 64 species, because I've got quite a few species to take back, all micros, and to photograph in the morning. But among those that have come in, the more interesting ones that maybe I haven't showed you in the past, Salifa striana. We'll do a few micros at this point, because I believe that micros really need publicising more. They are fabulous things, but Salifa striana is a nice one. Carcina quercana, that's a little beauty, that is. And what else have we had? Endotricha flammialis, which is very common anyway, most woodlands that you trap. Anania lancialis is moth of the night by a long way, but I've probably already showed you that. And Acrobasis consociella, which is a real stonker of a moth. Fabulous little thing. I put a picture in of that because the one that I've got is as fresh as a daisy, and I know it is that, but I just want to take it home, get some photographs of it, and just make sure, and I can bring it back tomorrow. So some really nice species of the macros. Large emerald has been in, another early thorn, September thorn I've told you about, grey daggers, I think the first one of the year. Two swallowtail moths that have been knocking about. Sycamore is a moth that I haven't seen for a while. Let's see what else. Buff ermine, large twin spot carpet, 3 elephant hawk moths. A really good selection of species, and the conditions are very pleasant. The temperature has only gone down to 14, so I'll probably give it a little bit longer, just see what else comes in. Well, it's been a really good 2.5 hours. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself actually, and it's been nice to reacquaint myself with a few species that I haven't seen for a year or two, since Dilys and I used to trap in the Sherwood Forest area very frequently. So with the wind still blowing through the tops of the trees I can hear, I'm going to have a steady pack up, keep an eye out on moths which are still coming in, but there's some good weather forecasts, so I'm hoping to trap again over the next few nights. Conditions are quite good for migrants coming from the south. They may not reach Nottinghamshire, but if you don't put your trap out, you haven't got a chance of catching them.